series of interviews of men who served in World War II. Back in this last fall, the Public Broadcasting Corporation put on that program of Ken Burns on Civil War, on the Civil War. And in looking at that program, one of the things that struck me was the 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. When all of those old geezers met down there at Gettysburg and all had white beards, and they were really old-looking men 50 years after the battle. Well, it occurred to me that here it is, this is 50 years after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. We're coming up on a very important anniversary in American history. We have a lot of men, I'm sure, in this community who had adventures during World War II. For them, I know in my own case, it was a strange experience. It was like you knew the draft was coming up on you, and you either volunteered or you waited for the draft to take you. And when it did take you, it was like a journey into the unknown. Most of us had never been very far from home, as a matter of fact, and here we were embarking on this experience and it was an unknown. You never knew whether you were going to be in combat or what was going to happen to you. Well, thinking of this Gettysburg anniversary, we at the Historical Society talked about this and decided that we ought to do something about this anniversary here in Montgomery County. And before these fellows all died off, we ought to get them in and have them tell about their experiences. So the Historical Society embarked upon this as their project for this year. And we thought first of audio tapes, but then we thought, well, we might as well get these people on videotape. Well, they made me the chairman of the committee. It was my idea, so I had to carry it out. Well, I thought of turning to the American Legion. And the guy that I thought who could help us on this was Clare Chamberlain. Clare had, I think, was a finance officer. Is that right, Clare?
I am, yes.
A finance officer, and we're going to have to tap a money bag if we could find one. The first idea was that we would get the Legion and maybe the Veterans of Foreign Wars to buy a video camera and donate it to the Historical Society and then go ahead with the project. But when I turned to Clare, he said, well, you didn't think that was going to be necessary because they had a member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars that was willing to donate his own equipment and his time to do the videotaping. So as a result of this, and this fellow's name was Ed Miller. I think it's James Ed Miller.
James Ed Miller.
And he's been doing a good many of these tapes. And it's been very useful in helping us out and get the program working. Well, Ed Miller isn't here today. We wanted to interview him because he had a role in World War II. He was a veteran, served, I think, both in the Italian campaign and over in the Pacific. But he's not here today, and he won't do it, but we've got Clare here. And I might add that not only did we get the cooperation of he had on his equipment, but we got the cooperation from both the Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars to contribute to buy the tapes that were necessary. And we've already used a couple of $100 worth of tapes.
Right.
I'm doing it. We got about, what was it, 15, Claire, something like that?
I think this would be the 17th tape.
17th tape. Well, so let's start out with Clare Chamberlain here. Claire, why don't you tell us your date of birth and where you came from?
Okay, I was born June 2nd, 1923, in a little town in Michigan called Schoolcraft.
Schoolcraft. That's
Schoolcraft, Michigan.
up way up north, isn't it?
No, that's just across, about 30 miles across the Indiana line,
Oh, I was thinking.
between Three Rivers and Kalamazoo.
Uh-huh. And where did you go to school?
Well, I lived on a farm, born on a farm, and I went to school mainly at Schoolcraft until the 4th grade, and then they opened up a one-room school again out by us, about half a mile from where we lived. So 4th through the 8th grade, I went to this one-room country school.
Uh-huh. That was at Schoolcraft too.
Near Schoolcraft,
Yeah.
that was. And then, and when I graduated from 8th grade, I wanted to take vocational agriculture, and the high school at Schoolcraft didn't have that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to Vicksburg, which was about twice as far and the opposite direction east of where we lived. But I graduated from Vicksburg High School.
And did you go on to college?
Yes.
Where'd you
I
go?
graduated in 1941 from Vicksburg, and I started that fall at Michigan State University at East Lansing.
And when did the draft start?
Well, of course, I was up there when the Japs hit Pearl Harbor. Remember the day very well. We were in our room, and just shortly after the Japs hit, we were called into the auditorium by President John Hanna and told us that nearly all of the males that were in there would be drafted or could volunteer, or that no doubt would be called into the service, but to stay in school as long as you could. So I stayed in the rest of that fall term, winter term, and spring. Came back in the summer of 42. I worked on my dad's farm, and then went back just one semester that fall.
That would have been in what year?
That would have been in 42.
Okay.
When I came home, of course I had registered for the draft, and when I came home, which was around the holidays, my dad got very ill with a stomach problem and had a very serious operation. And we had what we at that time was a large farm, 200 acres. My brother had already been drafted and was in England in the Air Corps, as they called it at that time, Air Force later. And we didn't know what we were going to do about the farm, because I had one younger sister who was 7 years younger, and she could help a little bit. So we went to the draft board, and they gave a deferment so that I could run the farm while my dad recuperated.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been in the spring of 43.
And but finally the draft did catch up with it.
Well, in the spring of 43, we did all the farming, put the corn out and the soybeans, and combined the wheat, and put up the hay, which was a big job without any help. And I believe then, Bob, that had been my first opportunity to see Germans, even though it was on our home farm, because we were so short of help putting up hay that our neighbor had a fruit farm over at Benton Harbor on Lake Michigan, and he had several German prisoners over there. And he told my dad, who was ill at that time, as I said, recuperating, that he would bring 3 of the German prisoners over and they could help me put the hay up. So I worked right up in the hay mow and loading the hay and working right along with those German prisoners. they had pitchforks, and I've often thought, you know, some of them still had bitterness in their mind, but they were very nice. They could talk very little English. They showed me pictures of their family. They were all married. They were really happy to be here, I believe.
Well, did they stay here after the war?
Somebody said that several German prisoners, I don't know, I didn't know their names. A lot of them were German prisoners. After they were released and liberated and went back to Germany, they came back here, became citizens.
Okay, that was in 43 then?
That's right, okay. And then in 43, along in the fall, there were 3 of us, would have been around 20 years old, that had what they would call an agriculture deferment. And we were working on a baler, baling straw. And all of us, it had been bothering me that all my friends had gone in the service, and also that I felt a patriotic duty to go. And so the 3 of us that were working that baler all decided that we would give up our draft exemption and go into the service, which we did. And that would have been a long...
Well, the farm get along then?
Well, that was somewhat of a problem. I asked my dad and mother at the dinner table what my plans were. And before that, I noticed that my dad was coming along. His health was pretty good. And I told them, I knew they would be upset, and they were. But I told them that was my decision, that I was going to go in. And by that time, Dad could run the combine and was able to drive a tractor. We'd cut down the number of livestock we had, so he didn't have so much to do, and volunteered for the draft.
And where'd you go?
Okay. Before I volunteered, I went to Detroit to the Navy Officer Procurement Office to see if I had enough college to go to midshipman school to become an officer. And they informed me, they looked over my transcripts, and I did not have enough credits from Michigan State to go to midshipman school. And I said, well, can I get into what would be called a B-12 program to get enough more math and other things so that I could enter midshipman school and get a commission in the Navy? And they said no, that the way I would have to do it is to go in the Navy, just regularly, and maybe an opportunity would open up somewhere along the line where I could get additional college training and then get a commission.
Yeah. And is that what you did then?
Well, I went to, on September the 16th of 1943, I was sworn into the Navy and rode on a troop train from Detroit to Great Lakes in Chicago, and took 8 weeks of boot camp there at the Great Lakes.
Yeah. Did these 3 buddies, there's other 2 buddies go with you?
Well, that's rather interesting. One of them, they called him up a week earlier than me, so we didn't get to go together. He got in the Navy. But the other man, whose name was Don Vanderveen, didn't know that he was colorblind until we took our physicals in Detroit. And so the Navy wouldn't take him, and he had to go in the Army. So we really, right off the bat, were split up.
Yeah. And what was Great Lakes like at that time?
Well, Great Lakes was a big mass of sailors. Everywhere, they were really putting a lot of men through there. I was in what was known as Camp Green Bay, and the company number in 43 was Company 1415, and we marched and we did the manual of arms and tried to teach us how to become sailors.
They put you in bell-bottom trousers?
Yes, most of the time there we wore dungarees, but we did have trousers. They weren't really bell-bottom, but they were.
Those kind with all the buttons up here?
Yes, I wore them at times. Right.
Those and the middies with the cape, kind of the cape over the back? Did they have that?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they did. Was interesting to me when I came in there, and of course it's been changed since then. When we marched in there, we marched by. The troops were segregated. The black folks had their own camp called Camp Moffat,
Yeah.
and all of the black sailors to be were separated from us, and we were all white.
Yeah. Well, that was the way it was during World War II.
That's right.
Hard to realize that now.
Right.
Okay, what happened after Great Lakes?
Well, after Great Lakes, of course, they gave us tests in school there. I'd had considerable experience on the farm with mechanical type things. I had pretty good mechanical aptitude test. And I tried to look at my discharge papers, and I'm sure it's on there, but behind my serial number, there was a small V, which meant that I had volunteered for the draft. I wouldn't say that this really was beneficial in getting what I wanted, but it didn't hurt anything. And when the list came out of the group from this boot camp company, there were 3 of us taken to what was known as Aviation Machinist School. And that was at Navy Pier in Chicago.
That was a nice assignment.
That was a good assignment.
Where did you live?
We lived right on Navy Pier. And we came in there on Thanksgiving Day of 1943. And for that matter, we liked it because we had a Thanksgiving dinner before we left Great Lakes, took a short train ride, and had another Thanksgiving dinner, which made us all happy. So we started out, it was a very intensive training, some math, mechanical drawing, fabricating of the wings and of the plane and so forth. Everything went real well. Because the military training I'd had in ROTC at Michigan State, I was in charge of 20 men there, and marched them to class, and we marched back, and it was good duty. Shortly after we got there, I realized that our CO was Orrin Tucker.
Oh,
Does that ring a bell with you?
Oh, yeah.
The band leader, the famous band leader. And for those who were watching before that day, he was a noted big-time band leader.
Played down at the Edgewater Beach Hotel.
Right. And he had a singer by the name of Wee Bonnie Baker.
Wee Bonnie Baker.
And she sang "Oh Johnny." And I can say that he was a lieutenant then. He later became a lieutenant commander. He was a prince of a man.
Uh-huh.
He was just great. You could visit with him, and he was just a prince of a guy. And he brought his orchestra out one day.
Did he bring Wee Bonnie Baker?
Yes, he did. And she sang for us in the auditorium down at the end, on the end of Navy Pier. And she sang for us, and he was just a prince of a guy.
Okay, was this just training at Navy Pier, or was it, were you getting instruction, or were you doing actual work?
We were doing both. We had classroom instruction with math and mechanical drawing, and working on planes to become a mechanic on an airplane.
Mm-hmm. All right. How long were you there?
I was there from Thanksgiving Day until July 1 of 1944.
Goodness, that was a long time.
It was a long class school. About a month before I was to graduate from there and be assigned to sea duty, they put a bulletin on the board, and I talked to Commander Orrin Tucker about it a little bit too. They put on there that they wanted a few people from Navy Pier to apply for what I originally wanted when I went in the Navy, which was to go to midshipman school. So I talked to him about that, and I applied, and was asked to take a physical, which was really a very thorough physical. And I wasn't sure that I'd even pass the physical because of my eyes. But lo and behold, I was happy to see that I had been selected. And my orders were to report to a small college in Minnesota known as Gustavus Adolphus College, St. Peter, Minnesota. And they gave me, I think, 10-day leave. And then I reported there on July the 1st, 1944.
And that was just about right after the D-Day, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it was. And we got up there, and I didn't know for sure how long I'd have to stay there. And it was a very intensive training. I was enrolled in the college just like I was a student, and taking a lot of math.
Were there other students?
Yes, there were about 500 sailors there.
But were there non-military people going to class?
There were 5 men, civilians, but there must have been 200 girls that were going there.
That made it nice, didn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, it did. Very nice. Most of the D-12 students there had arrived there right out of high school, and so they were just young 17 and 18-year-old boys. There were a few of us, I'd say maybe 10, 12, who had been either out to sea or had served time in the Navy. But the training was very thorough. They had us up every morning, something like 5:30 or 6, and we ran, did exercises before breakfast. The physical training and the training academically were hard. They were difficult. The nice part about it, Bob, was that being a student, we could play college sports. And I had played a little baseball in high school, and our coach of the baseball team, this had been in the spring of '45, ran a filling station. His name was Tootie Lindenberg. And I knew Tootie pretty well. I was a little older than the others, and so I would talk to some of the officers and some of the teachers, maybe a little more than some 17 or 18-year-old person would. And he said, I asked him how the baseball team was going to be, and he said, well, I don't know, I got an unusual situation. I've got 4 pitchers, and they're all left-handed. And so I said, well, I pitched a little in high school. Well, he said, tomorrow night, during practice, come on out. So I borrowed a glove, and I went over there, and I told him that I knew how to throw a sinker ball. And we were in the gym. It was in like February or March, early part of the season. And he said, let's see that sinker that you can throw. And so I threw one, and it worked. It went down real good. He said, report for practice tomorrow night. Well, we had a 9-game schedule, very limited. And I pitched the last 2 games for that college. Won 1 and lost 1.
Is that on the records up there
Yes,
permanently?
it is. Yes. Yes, it is.
With
and I got a letter.
With an asterisk there saying this fellow really wasn't in college.
Well, I was in college. I was a student.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, on those V12 programs, what kind of subjects did they have?
Well,
was it a liberal arts program?
Yes, primarily. I took a lot of the physics, the mechanical and the electrical were extremely difficult. The chemistry. We had a lot of math. Now, I didn't have to take calculus, but I did have to take analytical geometry. But I had kind of a special program for me because I'd already been to college and had several of these classes. What they were trying to do was to build my credits up enough so I could go to midshipman school.
Well, did you finally, how long were you in Gustavus Adolphus?
I was there a year.
A full year? Well,
yes.
That put you up to when?
That put me up to July 1 of 1945. The war was over with Europe.
Yeah.
And this became, you see, one of the reasons that they wanted they were intent, and had several of us. I went to Notre Dame, by the way, on July the 1st, a midshipman school. And they wanted the invasion of Japan, it was estimated, would take large numbers of landing craft. And they had several of us that reported to midshipman school at Notre Dame, where the physical requirements and the calisthenics and tests you had to go through for endurance were very difficult. And they also had mainly we took navigation and signaling, damage control, naval history and things like that. And they were very, very strict. The discipline at Notre Dame, Lieutenant Commander McCurry told me when I went there, I was the only one from Gustavus that was sent on to midshipman school at that time. He said, you will find it to be very, very difficult. And it was. So I started there approximately the 1st of July.
And how long did that take?
Okay. This became a rather unusual circumstance because on August the 7th was the day, maybe the 6th or the 7th, the atomic bomb was dropped. There were about 800 of us from all of the United States at midshipman school. We had already had our graduation pictures taken. We already had our uniforms, all ordered from Gilbert's there in South Bend, all set to go, and the atomic bomb was dropped, and they called all but 100 of us into the auditorium and took all of us on the program. They didn't need us, which was a real shocker. We were glad the war was coming to an end, but I'd worked all this time and did not get my commission because they took us all out of the program, but maybe 100 out of 800. Approximately that number, as I remember.
So then it was nothing but discharge.
No. The ones who had come right out of high school and had taken the 2 years of V-12 training were then sent to Great Lakes for boot camp. Well, I'd already been there. And so they sent me, I was about the only one, they sent me to New York, to Brooklyn, stayed there just a few days, and then took a troop train to San Francisco, and they shipped me overseas right then. Within a month, I was overseas.
But where did you go?
I got on a Liberty ship, and I went to Okinawa. And the war had it was winding down, and for that matter, the treaty had been signed, or the surrender terms had been signed. We went by, on the way, we went by Iwo Jima, where we've had other people we've interviewed talk about. We went near that island and saw it. The most eventful thing, I think, on the way to Okinawa would have been the typhoon that we got into, which was pretty scary because of the high winds and the high waves and the damage that it was doing to the land. And but we finally got to Okinawa.
Yeah. And were you stationed in Okinawa?
No, the ship that I went over on, I believe it was called the USS Bazelon, as I recall. We stayed there for a few days, and they wanted to take us. At that time, they were still liberating China. And so they took us on the USS Bazelon and took us up the Yangtze River, up the Huangpu River to Shanghai, China. And
You've never been to China before?
No. No, and I haven't been since. And that was an eye-opener. It was shortly after the war, and I don't think I'll ever forget going down that Huangpu River, which was a brown, dirty color, and seeing these people that lived in sandbanks, some of them on there all their lives, all poverty, drinking the same water that was over the side, washing their clothes in that water. And then along the sides of the river, I think of this when I hear of the refugees over in Iraq. Those hillsides were lined with thousands and thousands of Chinese refugees. I don't know what they were doing, just milling around, just moving around. Very ill-clad, no food, no guidance, digging in the ground. Now what they were doing, I suppose, I hate to say this, but probably looking for some type of creature that they could probably eat. And it was very, very pitiful.
Yeah. Now this was taking the Wangpu River up to Shanghai?
Shanghai, right.
Did you get off at Shanghai?
Yes, I did. In Shanghai, I met the ship there that I was put on, which was called the USS Norton Sound, which was AV-11, was a seaplane tender. Beautiful ship, relatively new, big. I just wished I could have found my material at home that told the size of it. But it was big. We had everything aboard that you'd need. We had doctors, we had dentists, we had a de-dunk stand, you may have heard that before, that's ice cream. We had stores, we had everything. Our job for that ship was to service PBM Mariner planes, big seaplanes, that did reconnaissance type work. And when I got on there, I was assigned to Company V1, which was a maintenance group that put the gasoline and the oil in these planes as they were moored out somewhere in a gulf. And we were on the ship, but we would climb down the ladder on a fantail and get in what was called a Bowser boat. Held 2,000 gallon of 100-octane gasoline. It had a coxswain who had a diesel engine on it. There were usually 3 of us, the coxswain and then 2 of us from Company V1 who went to the plane.
What was your rank about this?
Seaman first class, aviation machinist name with a striker. Because they gave me that back when the V-12, when the midshipman program was just taken out in the end, when the bomb was dropped. And we would get a call over the PA system, and it would say, away, Bowser boat number 1. And we would climb down that fantail, get in that boat, and go out to the plane, go underneath the wing, climb up on the wing, and put the fuel in it. And check the oil and see if the oil was okay. And it was good duty, really. It was kind of dangerous. I had to stop back and think, climb around on that plane on the wings, right out in the bay in the ocean, and it was really quite an experience.
Did you get to see much of Shanghai?
Yes, I did. We went to a nightclub there. Had a big time orchestra there, just like you'd have in Chicago. It's a very modern town. It was very old. We could hear rifle fire in the distance. At that time, the communists were moving in. And we could hear rifle fire and cannons in the distance. But I rode in a rickshaw. They had 2 kinds of money. They had the communist money, which was the most valuable, and then they had CNC, which was Chinese national currency, which wasn't worth the paper it was written on. But we were there probably, Bob, I'd say maybe a week. Probably a week altogether. You want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Or I'll forget it.
We're
but
trying to...
I just thought of something. When we got there, the Japanese prisoners that the Chinese had not been turned over to the Japanese yet. And when we went ashore, they were marching these Japanese prisoners to real beat-up barges, like, and loading them on them to take them back to Japan. And the Japanese prisoners were in bad shape. They were very thin. We had to do, we did some SP duty there. We had to
Shore patrol.
Yeah, shore patrol. And we had to watch the Chinese along the side because they would reach over and abuse Jap prisoners. Mm-hmm. If they had a chance, they'd grab him and slap him, the war's over.
Yeah.
And I can remember that, they didn't do anything real physical, but they were trying to rough them up because, of course, the Japanese treated the Chinese terrible, and they were thinking they were getting even.
Mm-hmm.
But Shanghai, those are the things I remember. The policemen were from India, and they wore turbans on their hair. And this is a little bit gruesome, but I'll tell it anyhow. It's not really that bad, but the people in China were living like at the turn of the century in America. Very crude farming and very poor. Everything was bad. And every morning aboard this USS Norton Sound, we would hear rifle fire. Besides, in the distance, we'd hear it nearby. And so we went ashore. The Indians that were guards could talk English, of course, from being from India. And we asked them what that fire was that we heard about the crack of dawn. And he said, they're executing any Chinese they found stealing last night.
Oh, my.
So it made you glad you were an American, And but things were bad there. It was not uncommon. They paid little attention to it. To see several bodies just floating by our ship as it was anchored there in the Atlantic River.
Did the communists get there before you skedaddled?
No, they did not.
They were still.
They were still coming.
Nationalists were still in charge.
Still in power, right?
Mm-hmm. And okay, you left there about when?
I left there, I'd say, late in the fall, and went back to Okinawa. And stayed at Okinawa for approximately another 2 weeks, fueling planes. We did have an incident there. You may have heard of that. There were cases of isolated small patches of Japanese who didn't know the war
was over.
And we did, on a Bowser boat trip, I hear rifle fire. We didn't hear any bullets zip by us, but I don't know whether they were firing at us or not. But we called on our radio and reported it to our ship. And they sent, our ship had Marines on it. And they sent several Marines to the area where we heard rifle fire. And they brought back, I can't remember, 3 or 4 awful looking Japanese that had been there. Yes, they were dehydrated, and they brought them up on the deck of the ship, which we called the flight deck, although planes didn't take off, and we could pull 2 PBM Mariners right up on the deck and work on them with big cranes. But we had our Japanese interpreters, and they talked with them and found out that they said they did not know the war was over. The Marines that went over, they said, as they approached them, they held up a white flag. And but they did fire. That's how we knew they were there, and we did hear that. So that's about the only thing, other than another typhoon, which we had to go out to sea. Anchors wouldn't hold through that. We went out to sea and headed into it. And it was as rough as the other one. We had no food because it was so rough. They couldn't light the grills. They'd get burned. The cooks would get burned on it. And so we ate Vienna sausages morning, noon, and night. It was about the only thing we had. we did have an incident in the mess hall where they had acetylene and oxygen tanks lined around the edge with a chain around it. And the force was so great that it broke those chains, and those acetylene tanks got loose and were rolling all around. We had to jump on them to hold them down so that they wouldn't break and blow off and become just like a jet. Right.
All right. The war was over. What did you do after?
Well, after that, we got orders from Okinawa to go to Hong Kong, and we made the trip down there. Had some beautiful bay, just beautiful. We came into the harbor there, and it's a beautiful natural harbor. And we stayed there probably maybe 2 or 3 weeks at Hong Kong.
So you got to go ashore at Hong Kong?
Yes, several times. Got my pockets picked there by a coolie. Had my money up here in my jumper of my Navy blouse, and I can remember 2 or 3 of them hit me at the same time when I'm with the newspaper, and when I reached up, my money was gone. So my buddies had to treat me there at Hong Kong. Being on a Bowser boat, I did get to go some places that were off limits or near there. And of course, right across the bay, I'm not going to be able to think of the name of that town, Canton. Would that be right? That might not. Anyway, it was so dirty and so much disease and everything there that servicemen were not allowed to go there. But we, one day, were asked to, as we were over near there, to pick up the mail for the ship. And so we were right near there, and conditions there were worse than in China. It was just awful. Just filth and disease and sick people and so forth. But other than the beautiful harbor, nothing really out of the way happened in Hong Kong.
Ever been back to Hong Kong?
No, I haven't. I wouldn't mind going back there.
Are you coming up to the time when you're going to get discharged?
Not quite.
Okay. What happened?
We're probably at the beginning of the year now, 1946.
46.
Right. And we got our orders to go. Originally, the orders, as we understood it, were to go to Vladivostok, Russia, clear from down there, clear way up into the whole country. Had whites on down in Hong Kong because that's a warm area. Bananas growing, you could pick nice ripe little bananas off the tree. They were delicious, and you could eat them. You could eat meat that was prepared, but in most of those towns you could not drink the milk. You could drink the alcohol, but you couldn't drink the milk and the food. You had to make sure that it had been prepared and cooked. But we were supposedly going to go to Vladivostok, and I remember in the night I slept near the fantail of the ship, which is aft, and I thought that we had gone by Japan, probably halfway up there, and you could just feel the ship turning. And the next morning we were told that the orders had been changed, and we were going to go to Tokyo Bay to Yokohama, which we did. I might mention, before I forget it, Bob, that right near me slept a fellow who later became a movie star. He was a brother to Lawrence Tierney, the movie star who played the part of Dillinger in the Dillinger movie. This young man's name was Gerald Tierney. And after he got out of the service, his name on stage was Scott Brady, the stage name of him. He played in westerns, and he was in our group. He didn't work very hard, but he was in that group. And we went, I'm telling that, like I said, so I don't forget it, but when we got to Tokyo Bay, we kind of bothered us because a Japanese came out in a pilot boat and piloted us into the bay. And it kind of bothered us. The Jap was the man in charge of our ship. And he brought us in there. We anchored there, and we stayed there for fueling planes. I got to go ashore in Yokohama. Did not get into Tokyo. The town was called Yokosuka. It was a big seaplane area, and it had been bombed by Americans. It had been bombed. Yokohama had very few buildings standing. You could see they'd been, it was unfortunate, a lot of civilian areas had been hit. It looked like a tornado had gone through. It was just, the bomb damage and the war damage were just terrible. Streetcars wouldn't hardly run. The fire hoses wouldn't hardly work if there was a fire. There were a few buildings downtown standing. One of them was taken over by the USO. The other was taken over by the Red Cross. There was a big theater which was off limits. We could not go in there because it didn't have air conditioning or restroom facilities in it, but it had not been hit. We moved around Yokohama quite freely. You were not to go out alone at night, because now and then there would be something happen where someone would lose their life. And even at that point, we did see a couple of soldiers' bodies floating in the bay from some type of trouble they'd gotten into or something. But we stayed there along in March then. They began to want us out of the military. And my name was read over on short notice over the PA system to get my gear ready. That's your equipment. And be ready in 1 hour to board another ship for our trip back to the United States. And I got on another Liberty ship, and we went to via Guam. Came down to Guam, and there we had some experiences there that I might reiterate if you want me to. A real good friend of mine had lost his life on Guam, and named Jack Hawkins, who was a fantastic baseball player. For that matter, when we started earlier, I said I knew how to throw a sinker. He was the one that showed me how to throw a sinker ball in pitching. And he had lost his life, ironically, playing baseball. And so when we anchored there, we weren't there only maybe like a week. I went to the chaplain there and to the headquarters offices of the Army right there at Guam, and asked them if I could see his records of where this accident had occurred. And he assigned a sergeant to me and took me over to the hospital, and I found his records and looked at them, and he did lose his life the way they said. And then I said, well, can I go up to Agate Cemetery, which is on the point as it overlooks the bay there on Guam? And he said, no. He said, the only way that you can go up there is for the sergeant who is armed to take you up there, because number one, the Guamnesians are not friendly.
Oh, okay.
And number two, those jungles are full of Japanese yet. And so, with another guy whose name was Frank Marks, I remember his name, Frank Marks and I and this Army sergeant with the ammunition armed went down up this road to Agate Cemetery and went through this Guamnesian village. They're nice-looking people, but they were, like I said, they were not friendly. We did not see any Japs in the jungle. I went up and I did find Jack's grave and saw it. They weren't supposed to take pictures of it, but we did. The guy there in charge said, take pictures of it. And then we came back and got on the ship and came back to San Francisco.
You say he lost his life playing baseball. What a good
Got hit in the head with a baseball.
Is that right?
Gosh. Yes, so he died with cerebral hemorrhage.
They didn't weren't wearing helmets in those days.
No, he was a Marine.
Uh-huh.
They were playing, he was an excellent baseball player. He was left-handed and a good pitcher and a real good hitter. I would say if Jack hadn't have lost his life there, he'd had a chance to be a real good college player or better.
Yeah.
He was very good hitter.
Now, you got to San Francisco, and
They didn't want us. They were anxious to get us out. I had enough points. We got to San Francisco, and about a day or two out of San Francisco, of course, the crow's nest. Do you know what that is, Bob?
No.
That's way up at the top, and there's a man up in there.
Yeah.
Who's looking. As a glance and look. And he reported a bunch of seagulls. We were getting close enough to the shore that there would be seagulls out that far. Usually albatross were the only ones that followed.
Yeah.
But he said that there were seagulls landing on something white. Well, the something white, as we got almost up to it, was a mine floating. And it just, we were standing on the deck, and it just slipped by the side and did not touch the ship. It was probably within 50 feet. And it went off to the side, and then they got ammunition and guns out, and when they got safe distance away, they blew it up. And that was only like maybe a couple of hundred or less nautical miles from San Francisco.
Yeah.
It was never written up. I don't know whose mine it
Probably
was.
not a Japanese mine, though.
No, it probably was one of our own that got loose.
One of your own.
Well, what threw them off was it was riding in the surface of the water, and it was white from the droppings from the gulls.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a little bit unusual. Then when we got near, we could see the Golden Gate. We were up at daybreak, watching for the Golden Gate. And we had some guys with us that could read very well. I could read a little bit at that time, some of the lights. And he said they're going to come out after we go under the bridge and pick us up. They're not going to wait till we anchor. So they did. They met us out there with a big landing craft, and we all got down and into that. We went in and we stayed one night at San Francisco. They put us on a troop train back to Great Lakes. We got there in the morning, and that night I was home. Got us out that quick.
Huh. Now that would, what was your date of discharge?
May 26, 1946.
And where did you go? You went back to Schoolcraft, did you?
Yes, I went back to the home farm and I helped my dad a little bit that summer. And then in the fall, I enrolled back under the GI Bill, which was a fantastic thing for the GI. I went back to Michigan State in the fall of 46, and went 2 more years then. I had to get all my work in and my classes in. I went 2 more years and got my degree in agriculture to be a vocational agriculture teacher.
And were you married at this time?
No. I graduated from college, took my first job, and got married all in the same week.
And when were you married?
June 11th, 1948.
All right. What was your first job then that you mentioned?
I was a vocational agriculture teacher in a little town called Centerville, Michigan.
All right. And how long were you there?
I was there 2 years. Then I took a different ag teaching job at a little town called Nashville, Michigan, up by Lansing. I taught VOAG, and I also taught veterans. I was a veteran, but see, there was a GI Bill for on-the-farm training for veterans, and I also taught veterans classes too, which was very enjoyable.
And what you say you were married by this time?
Yes.
Did you have any children?
Yes. My wife that I married at that time, with her we had, we had 5. One passed away at 3 months old. We had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls.
And do you have any grandchildren now?
Yes, I have 9 grandchildren, but the mother of my children died in 1970 with cancer. And I am remarried now. So I have several stepchildren. I believe altogether we have 9, Bonnie and I together have 9 children, 19 grandchildren, counting the steps, 9 of which are come from me, and 1 great-grandson, Bonnie has.
You have to get Milligan Park in order to have a family reunion there,
That's
don't
right, we sure do. We love them all, so
Yeah.
they're a great bunch.
you? Who is your present wife?
I married Bonnie. Her name was Campbell, and of course her name is Bonnie Chamberlain. Now she was married to Bob Campbell, had a trucking firm here in town, and he died in the middle 70s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Now, you've been active in the Legion.
Yes. Might back up just a little bit, if we have time.
Oh, sure.
I left teaching in 1952 and went with a large feed company called Ralston Purina Company as a salesman. That's how I got to Indiana, because I was working in Flint, Michigan, and Lansing, or near Lansing, Michigan, in a little town called Elma. And I was transferred down here in 1960 to Anderson with Ralston Purina, and only stayed with them 4 more years, and then I started working for the co-op in 1964, and was transferred from Anderson to Crawfordsville in 1967. That's when I got in the Legion.
Yeah. Okay. So your Crawfordsville experience starts in '67.
That is right. Never had been in the American Legion. I don't know why I hadn't been asked or thought of it, or the VFW, which I was, of course, eligible for. When I left Anderson, a man that ran a Buick garage over there, his name was Mac McLean. He found out I was coming to Crawfordsville, and he said, when you get to Crawfordsville, he said, I want you to go see my father-in-law, who's Dr. Doherty. And he said, he'd be glad to see you, and you tell him that I said hello. So I'd been here about a week, and our co-op office was down in what they call the Enterprise Building in the main drag downtown. And I had to drive by Dr. Doherty's office, and I went in there, and the office was full of people. And she said, could I help you? And I said, well, I really, I'm not in here for health purposes, but I just wanted to say hello to Dr. Doherty. His son-in-law told me to stop and say hello. And I said, he's awful busy. She said, you mean Mac said that? I said, yeah. She said, you come with me.
Mm-hmm.
So he took me in there, and Dr. Doherty, sat down there, and he said, first thing he said was, you a veteran? I said, yes. I said, are you in the Legion? I said, no. I said, why not? I said, nobody ever asked me. He said, I'm asking you. I said, how do I do it? He said, give me $5 and tell me when you went in the service and when you got out.
Yeah.
And I thanked him. That's how I got in the Legion.
Yeah, he had been commander of the Legion, of course, before.
Yes.
You were commander of the Legion somewhere along the line.
1977. That was a real privilege to
Yeah.
be the commander of the Legion.
Well, and you went on to be you were the manager of the co-op here, and
Yes.
after you got out of, after that job, you went to the state
Yes.
co-op.
In 1981, after being the manager of the co-op here for 14 years, which I really enjoyed, and had excellent cooperation from farmers and from my health employees. I was offered a position as Vice President of Agri-Products with the Indiana Farm Bureau Co-op in Indianapolis. And I hated to leave, but it was something I couldn't turn down.
Yeah. So, that's your career.
That's my career.
That's very interesting. I particularly enjoyed those descriptions of China and the poverty over there. That was, I think, a lot of us who never got outside of the home state before the war took us. We saw lots of things we'd never seen.
It's awful hard, though,
Seen
Bob.
before, never see afterward.
Awful hard to put what we saw in the poverty line into words so that people, to describe it. I mean, you just about have to see it to believe how bad it is.
What misery there is in
Yes,
the world.
it's just horrible to, like I mentioned earlier, to see maybe a sandpan there isn't hardly room to move around in, and think that those people, some of them had never been on that. They were born on there, and they die on there, and then they just push them overboard.
Oh my.
Raking they have a thing looks like a rake, and they keep raking the bottom of that dirty Wangpoo River And anything they find, they would be pieces of coal that would be about the size of maybe a die. And they would save that coal, it'd be the only fuel they had. And they were also getting some type of organism that grows that they were eating. And to see them take buckets and wait all day long for our garbage disposal to run on that ship, and then line up like pigs at a trough, catching the garbage as it comes out of the ship.
Oh, gracious. Terrible.
It's hard to imagine that without really seeing it.
Well, Clare, that's been very interesting.
Thank you.
Sure
for
enjoyed it.
interviewing me.
And we want to thank you again for the help that you've given to this
I
program.
enjoy it.
I think you ought to make you an honorary member of the Montgomery County Historical Society.
That would
for
be
all
nice.
All you've done.
I enjoy it.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.